Hello, everyone. Today I'm with therapist Lisa Stegman. So, welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, John.
Lisa, today we are talking about grief, and I think maybe touching upon other things like descent, loss, the dark night of the soul. Maybe we'll touch on those
Yeah.
different areas. It's kind of a wider area, isn't there?
Yeah. It's a
And
lot included.
there's a lot included. But when I just wanted to quickly share something. When I woke up this morning, I read this, and it's from Alchemy. And I think, Jung's idea was that somehow in that process of alchemy, the transformation of substances, there is a good insight into what's happening psychologically and all that. And
Yes.
this is from Hillman. And he's imagining psychology through colors. And he's talking about the blackness. Blackness is often seen as an early stage of the work. The soul of the alchemist finds itself in a dark place, a nigredo, constricted, anguished. In Hillman's reflection on the color black, however, there is a lot more to be appreciated by blackness. For the alchemical blackness is also for the alchemist, blackness is also an accomplishment. And for Hillman, he sees the black's intentionality, deepening the soul, teaching endurance, and perhaps most important, serving to deconstruct positivities and paradigms.
Yeah.
So it's kind of some of the blackness we're talking about too. And I know you had a poem that you wanted to read just before we get underway.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love this this alchemical transmutation topic. This is close to my heart because I think that's so not understood in grief, that if you are willing to take the whole journey, if you're willing to sit with it and tolerate the constant surrender that's being asked of you, or a place where the ego just has no more safe passage, that there is that the prima materia of the alchemists, where there's a very intimate alchemical process. It's hardly anything that you can explain. It's just an interior, this vulnerable and shaky, tender place that transmutes the heart and the soul.
Yes.
When you're in what the Greeks had, the Chronos time and the Kairos time, the Kairos being the deep time, that where the world stops entirely.
Yeah.
And I think that's I don't know, there's some fruits that only can ripen in the darkness, and I think there's the potential for that source of mastery and grace and wisdom.
I like how he mentions the intentionality of black. That I think, sometimes I think, a couple of things. Like, firstly, there's an innocence that we have, a naive innocence.
Oh, yes.
And there's
I just heard somebody use a wonderful word, that this was a loss of our imperviousness.
Yeah.
Our sense that nothing bad can happen to us, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, in that naivety, there's kind of some thought of, well, if I do the right thing, and we've got a success model and a heroic model and all of that, and if I do the right thing, the universe will look after me, and it'll all turn out. And maybe implicit within all of that is this ascending model. We kind of learned that at school, but You work hard, you ascend up the spectrum and that. And then also maybe in our spirituality a little, like, you know, I can remember some of the groups of the 80s and all of that, you know, new age spirituality. There's that bright-eyed flying boy and girl with the light, you know, we're married to the light, let's say. But then somewhere along the way, it seems, and, you know, hopefully, you know, soon we're going to get to your story, but it's kind of like somewhere along the way, there often seems to be something that throws us into this deepening and into this idea that there are forces greater than ourselves, and we become, you know, but it's kind of like at the time, that's there's a fear of that black stage, isn't there? And
so much,
a shocking fear of it.
Yeah.
And that we don't know that we're ever going to come out of it at the time. You know, sometimes looking back, you can talk about it. So that's one thing. But at the time, it breaks your model.
Right. It completely breaks your model. And I think some of us, you know, need to have something of that catastrophic, you know, reckoning, dissolution to even allow us to go there. I mean, some place where surrender is the only option, you know?
Yeah.
And not in a conceptual way, but, you know, in a moment by moment way.
Where the rubber meets the road, as my friend used to say in Sydney, you know, it's kind of like, but, you know, it's interesting in alchemy too, just on that point, is that they kind of often see it as that's where the work begins.
Yes, 100%. 100%. And, you know, I mean, I've been a spiritual seeker my whole life, and, you know, but like, that's a place where all these practices and, you know, and disciplines you may have developed become completely dry and lifeless. And you're just, you know, like, you know, but grief, I think grief and illness also are doorways to that. Can be only if you stay with them, and can be doorways to something so much larger than we can conceptualize, especially when we live in such a grief illiterate culture.
Yes, because we live in a success culture, and I think, you know, I'm just speaking personally now, James Hillman, for me, especially, I remember one essay, Peaks and Vales, and the whole thing was to distinguish between how the spirit likes to ascend, you know, but the deepening into the soul, into the veils, into the depth, is another aspect that's so important, and perhaps that deepening happens for us. Not that he was saying this explicitly in that, but, you know, as we've been talking about, that deepening can happen through events, through illness, through grief, through loss.
Certain doorways.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a part of it that I didn't, you know, foresee, this sort of maybe potential generative capacity within, it's like a generative incapacitation where, you know, well, like, when everything, I don't even know who said this, but it's coming to my mind, when everything that can be taken away can be taken, must be taken in order to find what can't be taken.
Yeah, that's so true. And, you know, even when Jung says, you know, become who we really are, that, to me, that involves the loss of many things too, the loss of our persona that's worked for us, perhaps, some strategies you've learned as a youth, or, you know, the winning persona, even, the what does Jung say? Some of the most cherished ideals, you
Yeah.
know, it's a little bit related to what happens at midlife too, because it's kind of like
absolutely. Yeah. And so many of these things do happen at midlife or beyond, whether it's, it can be a death, the loss of your health, the loss of a marriage, the loss of your parents, and you're on to the net, like so many of these things can leave us all the things you thought you were, letting go of all that you thought you were, that's required really for that maturation, that second individuation, I think.
The real us,
Yeah.
and it's probably, in a way, it's no less than a death rebirth, even psychologically speaking. I mean, what's the thing that one has to die to be reborn? And in the old myth, there's kind of like two births. You have when you were born, and then somewhere you're having another another birth, a soul birth, if we can call it that, or something along those lines. But I want to get onto your story, Lisa. How you got onto this topic. How you
but not by choice.
No, like many of us, I don't think.
Right.
So can we start? But I know you have a very beautiful poem. Do you want to read that before we start?
Whenever you'd like.
Yeah. Let's start with that, and then we'll get on to your story.
Okay. It's called Opening to Darkness by Osho Zenju. Grief can last forever. It is a persistent tenderizer. If you can allow it to be itself, allow it to sit with you and speak through the silence. Let it use you to touch into the heart of all living beings and forever speak of love. This is opening to darkness.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah.
The tenderizer.
Isn't that amazing?
And I want to say, yes. And I want to say one more thing about the kind of success model, if you put it that way. I think in the success model, when one first goes into the darkness, let's say, for want of a better word, the blackness, in the heroic model, it's to get out of it, because you've always, you've been a resourceful person,
right.
And so it's like how to get out of it quick. But that thing of maybe not being able to get out of it, that is the real tenderizer.
That's where the juice of it can be. And Western culture, it's that whole emphasis, and I've just experienced so much of it in my own journey with this, where, it's the model is to get you back to normal, whatever that is, as quickly as possible. And in this culture, particularly in America, that means getting you back to productivity as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And, what if by doing that, you're completely missing the grace or the gifts, the potential generative gifts within the grief?
Yeah.
You're going to miss that boat entirely if you don't have time and space to sit with it.
And I remember when Jonah, I remember reading Thomas More's book a long time ago, Dark Night of the Soul, and there was something along the lines, he's swallowed by the whale, right? So, taken underneath by the whale, in the belly of the whale. But it was kind of like, ultimately, he comes back onto dry land, but it's kind of like it's the whale that takes him back to dry. It's not something where you're in the belly of the whale and you can just kind of get yourself out. it's
No.
kind of like in the right time, one will maybe
Yeah.
come back
Right.
and get one's foot
That's
on
the outcome.
solid ground.
Yeah. Right. Where it's not, it doesn't end up being the darkness of the tomb. It ends up being the womb. He gets a rebirth. And a lot of that metaphor, butterfly, being in mush in the cocoon, all of that. And I still don't know if I'm still hopeful that there's formation on the other side, but I don't know that from where I sit now. I don't know that, and I understand it can go either way. But I remain hopeful, and that like Chiron, the wounded healer, that eventually, who suffered so greatly his whole life from his own wounds that wouldn't heal, but eventually the wound becomes the source of his wisdom and his mastery, and something he has to offer.
And you see that in the shaman. I mean, I know we're going around a little, but in the shamanic culture,
because we have so many things to talk about.
Yeah, that's it. Often with healers or shamans. I was speaking to someone the other day, that had so much illness as a child. He had so much illness as a child. And that, in a way, he's saying, opened him up to the world of dreams and whatever. And then when you see traditional shamans, or even if you see Jung in terms of his creative illness, as they sometimes call it, when he wrote the Red Book or whatever, but, this thing of having to go to that kind of level of depth in order to embrace. But I note that even in the story of Persephone, who was just out picking flowers in her wonderful innocence and was abducted into the underworld.
Yes.
Even when she sort of gets out of the underworld, she spends a third or whatever of her time within the underworld. So I think maybe I don't know, the way I see it is like there's such a fear of the dark, but maybe we don't ever get out of that closeness to the tender, darker aromas.
Well, she's a great example because that's that loss of imperviousness, that she's in a sense the maiden, and then abducted into the underworld, but eventually she lives, whatever it is, like you said, half time between the worlds. She's forever between the worlds, but she also kind of has mastered both. She's becomes queen of the underworld, and as well as being able to visit the upper world, and it's so powerful.
Okay, let's get on to your story.
Okay.
How did you come to all of this?
Well, 2 years ago in April, my son Miles died. He was 31 years old and died of accidental fentanyl poisoning. He was a winemaker and a musician, and had a very dry wit and charming, beautiful smile. And so it's only been 2 years, and that's everything had to be put on hold, my psychotherapy practice, and then I also lost both of my parents within a year of that. So as destabilizing as imaginable, and what's brought me to think of all these, or just, I don't have to think. It's not I take that back. That it's not a matter of any thinking. It's it's actually like my heart teaching me an entirely new language, you know. Because I can tend to be up here, and as a lot of us, and this journey between the two, and you know, where nothing but, you know, this cultivation of such a deeper level of compassion than I could have had if this had not happened to me. You know, even as a therapist, it's like,
yeah,
you know,
it's a very
compassion.
short time to be
Yeah,
speaking about it, you know, but
yeah.
hopefully it's helpful to other. I remember when when I came back to Perth, I caught up with my old girlfriend from school, you know, and she lost a daughter when she was
Mhm,
when her daughter was very young, and
mhm.
I can remember, you know, not knowing the full story, having been away for a long time, 15 years or whatever, and going to meet her, and it's like, I think one of the things is it was, you know, I can remember saying to her, it's just, if no one's had that experience, it's just so hard to know what you're going through and to be able to,
Right.
you don't know, like what, you know, I imagine some people would have some false positivity or some try to pep
Yes,
people up or whatever. And but it's something that's so unimaginable in a way. It's so hard to actually know what to say for other people,
it
you know,
is.
much less
And
the agony you go through.
so many people don't know what to say. And all I can say about, you know, especially in a culture that's not good at this and at grief and its acknowledgement, and people are like, I didn't know what to say, or, you know, but grief just needs to be seen. It needs to be witnessed. That's all it needs. It
Right.
doesn't need you to be perfect in what you say. I would say that not saying anything is just a terrible thing to do to a grieving person.
Mm.
It doesn't matter if you get it right, or, you know, but really they just would like it to be witnessed without you going into a story about how, you know, whatever. And just yeah, just seeing, you know. Um that's all. And it teaches you so much, you know. Some people that you would expect to show up for you, for whatever reasons, are just not capable.
Mm.
And then other people who, you know, you may not have been even that close to, that just keep showing up. They'll check in with you now up to 2 years, you know, years later.
Mm.
They're still checking in, and it's just, you know, it's just beautiful, and revealing, and, you know, so many things. And it's a very isolating experience,
Yeah.
because like you said, unless you've experienced something of that magnitude, you can't, and, you know, you understand that even when you
So,
wish people might be better.
yeah. So, what are some of the things that, you know, how would you describe the experience?
How would I describe what?
How would you describe that experience of, um, when you look back now after 2 years, what would be the main things about it? You know, maybe kind of things we were talking around in the beginning, some of them, uh, but what would
Yeah.
you say? What would you say?
Well, since the beginning, I mean, I've just felt a commitment to showing up for it, you know, to not you know, drinking it away, or any of the many ways that you could avoid. You know, I wanted, there was some part of me that wanted to stay with it, you know, or just knew that it was important to stay with it, no matter how painful it was, you know. And like to just allow whatever was arising to arise, and just, like, yeah, but all these tools and practices can just, they're of no help at this point, and it's a journey. There's no, it's a journey you have to make yourself. And, I think, as both Jung and Hillman have said, that, but if you are on an underworld journey, it is best to try to find companions. It's too scary to do alone. But, for me, I think the nature of who's a potential teacher, guru, helper, it's entirely different. It's for me, it's only can be at this point, can be someone else who has been on a similar underworld journey, and I have been very fortunate to have wise and brilliant underworld guides, that have literally been, lifesavers for me.
There's two people you mentioned, Mirabai Starr and
Yeah.
Jeff, is it Cyrus? Do I say it that way?
Her name is Jet. Yeah. Saris, correct. She's my therapist. And I'm very fortunate to have her. You were mentioning before about a lot of similarity with the midlife journey. And she has two books. One's called Undefended Love, and the other one is called Hidden Blessings, Midlife Crisis as a Spiritual Awakening. So it's a lot about along the lines of what we were speaking of earlier. And she's also had the loss of her nephew to the same horrible, evil drug. And so she deeply, she's just holds space beautifully for me, brilliantly. And I was lucky that I had her before this even happened. So, and Mirabai, I don't know if you're familiar with
I'm
her
not.
books.
No, I'm not.
I'd say she's a feminine mystic but like a writer and teacher of all the wisdom traditions, the mystical branches, I'd say, of all the traditions. You mentioned Dark Night of the Soul. She Translated Saint John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul from Spanish, as well as Saint Teresa of Avila. But she lost her daughter Jenny when she was 14 years old. She stole her car and drove off a cliff in Taos. And Mirabai has a beautiful book called Caravan of No Despair about her experience with that. And she also has developed in just the last few years a grief group that is so resonant for me. It wouldn't be for everyone. It's outrightly, has a mystical bent, which I've been in some other grief groups that were helpful, but, kind of, studiously avoided the spiritual aspects of this journey, as maybe, we don't want to offend anyone, so we're not going to go there kind of feeling.
So what is the mystical bent then? I mean, can we just speak about that for a little while? What is the mystical side of this? The dark night.
Well, I think we have been speaking of it, the gifts available within that underworld or dark night, or, and, the avoidance of that, but you is prevalent, but you miss those capacities for maturation and soul, and, with really getting on board with soul. And when there's a place of such surrender that there's really nothing left to turn to except the divine, except soul, I think that's a fairly mystical outlook on it.
Yeah. It's like even in alchemy, when they talk about the philosopher's stone, it's kind of like I would say there's a nucleus, that maybe one thing that comes from this horrific winter, if we could call it that, is understanding that there's kind of a nucleus which is imperishable somehow within the soul as well, and that there's actually something incredibly life-giving about that, I suppose. I mean, I can remember, I'm just talking about, midlife crisis, right? But it was pretty big in my world in any case, but it's kind of like, prior to that, I was doing a lot of projects and each one was getting bigger than the next. And, it was going very, very hunky-dory in that. And then all of a sudden, bang, and I remember someone saying to me at the time, when the tide goes out, there's nothing you can do about it. And though, like, truer words were never spoken, because it's kind of like tide goes out and you're impotent to do anything about it in a way. You try everything to get yourself out.
Yes, you try everything. You want that back,
You're trying to resuscitate the dead past or something.
Yeah. And that image of, like, the boat or something not giving you safe passage, or no wind in the sails, or all of these metaphors. But I remember Jet just said to me, "You're not even in the boat. You're in the water. You're treading water." Or she would, when referring to that sort of butterfly metaphor, just being that just reduced to the imaginal cells in the cocoon, but she'd say, "You have just been pinned to the corkboard." There's this collapsed sense of self.
But somehow what I was thinking is that maybe what comes is, what I realized anyway about the previous time, which you tend to idealize, is that there's a tremendous amount of fear of failure or whatever, or like you're working also to save yourself from all of that, aren't you? The death and the loss and all that. And to actually start, maybe when I could sense a little bit of light in the whole thing, is when you start to realize that, hey, if you just died, so to speak, died psychologically speaking, you've actually kind of lost some fear and more of that soul as the foundation. One starts to just get an inkling of a transfiguration or a real transformation or something.
Yeah, and transmutation, for sure. That, like, okay, if all these things are stripped away and you're in the darkness, well, who are you in the dark? And what will you become? If not this and this and this and this and all these ego identifications.
But it has a timing of its own too. We should have to mention that again, don't we? It's not as if you can wake up and say, okay, well, I'm going towards the imperishable soul, so I'll live like that from now on. It's not quite like
No, it's not one bit like that.
It has to come in its own time. And when did you think you first got some inklings of what is it? Some re-emergence of light?
Well, like I said, there was a real increase in my my sense of compassion, as well as an entirely new relationship for me with vulnerability and my heart. you know, especially training and as a therapist, you're not trained to be the vulnerable one, right? And so there's some ways in which that carries over, you know. You do still think that imperviousness is there. And you know, well, for instance, I just was never a crier. I used to think maybe there was something wrong that I never cried, you know. And this level of vulnerability where I never know, you know, where, when, how, what might strike, where, you know, the grief will just, you know, come in a song, a lyric, it can be anything. And I'm just, you know, it's right there. It's right on the surface. There's no putting it away, you know. There's you know, that's a whole new way of relating for me.
Yeah.
And just like I mentioned, feel this feeling of my heart teaching me a new language or new way to be. And also some sort of sense that some kind of grace is happening within that process. I don't think I can quite articulate that, but
Yeah.
I do have the sense of
I can only in woo-woo kind of ways that somehow I like this sense that there's an intelligent design somewhere in the universe, you know, and that and I think you get moments, you know, even maybe in the darkest of our despairs, of some people call them synchronicities or whatever, that actually, whilst this is a harrowing experience, we can't get around that, that somehow it's the right. I think a lot's whether, you know, I think internally it's a lot about whether you think things are going right or not. And then you have to lose what you think is right or not and all of that.
right.
But then to get some feedback from the universe, to get some synchronicity, to get some, that is because it's like one has lost one's supports, but the support is starting to come from more invisible sources or something.
And like I said, certain people showing up, Mirabai, Jet, you know, a few other people in my life, and also, you know, sort of my realization that, you know, we were talking about your spiritual paths and whatever, but now grief is my path now. I understand it as a transformational path. And it is still, like you said, early, and I don't know what that exactly is going to look like, but it's path for me now.
Yeah. And it's quite shocking to think back, isn't it, toward to therapy.
Yeah.
What is it? You know, like sometimes, you know, I'm talking about the Jungian world. You can hear things which have a lot of intelligence and a lot of intellect and a lot of cleverness and stuff like that. And then, but I remember Jung saying, you know, it's just a short distance from the head to the heart, but it can take you 30 years or something. It's kind of like, but to play in that conceptual area seems almost ridiculous now, doesn't it? It's kind of like, I mean, there's more life and death things.
Yeah, but that is nothing, you know, one of those nothing truer said. I mean, that's certainly been how long it's taking my journey from my head to my heart, you know. If you can join the two, but yeah, you know, for those of us who tend to live there, it's a whole nother thing to get on board with, you know, like in a big way. So, but I do feel that's, you know, it's like Kali cutting through illusion to, you know, get the fire, the transformational fire that, you know, it has to destruct to liberate.
Yeah. You know, rebirth goes with the death. It's not like when we were in the spiritual group in the 80s and you thought, there was just this light and enlightenment or something like that. It's like
Right.
the two are irrevocably kind of entwined and entangled, and they inform each other, let's say.
Yeah, and it might be a topic for another time for us, but I think, that's really fascinating to me, the two streams, the transcendence and the imminence, and, like you're saying, spiritual circles and beyond. Everything in our culture is oriented towards the transcendence and so little towards the imminence that like a lot of people may not even know that word, right? It's down into the earth, down into the underworld. But this is what, that's transcendence is a masculine and patriarchal stream, and imminence, the feminine, it can't get away from the imminent strain.
Yeah.
But we don't get that emphasis because it's the marginalization, of the feminine in general. So that imminence has always fascinated me.
The earth, the body, the nature, the feminine, together there. I remember, just being honest, I wasn't a big fan of Marion Woodman, in the sense of maybe intellectual in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then one day I saw a talk that she gave, and she was just so in her body and embodied.
Yes, she was.
I got it. I just got that. Like, what a tremendous journey. What a thing to have reached, to be embodied.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very much. And I guess that challenge of staying in your body when it's in so much pain, and that's why it's not popular. No one wants to stay, sitting with it and in it. And
you aren't in the last 2 years of school saying, "Oh, I'd love to have a dark night of the soul. That would be really something." Loss, grief, and maybe it's lucky when you're a teenager that you have got that innocence, perhaps. Well, that doesn't happen to everyone either, because some people get things at an early age. But it's kind of like, it's not something that someone would want. Perhaps that's what we're saying.
Yeah, by choice.
And just tell me something else maybe you've learned from Mirabai. One thing that she's maybe said to you that has stuck with you and resonated.
Oh, so many things. Well, I think in her grief group, we deal with 12 different thresholds. It's not this like stages of grief. There are no stages. It's, that was an easy way early on for people to get a basic, but we deal with sort of thresholds that you pass through or experience in, multi-layered ways. But I think really I would say a personal experience I had with Mirabai. I went to a writer's workshop with her for a week. It wasn't related to the grief group, but I was there, and it was a year ago or so. So it was still all very fresh for me. And I went up to talk to Mirabai, and we had to write a little essay before we got accepted to the group. So she kind of knew my story, and I introduced myself, and she just looked up at me and she said, "Oh, honey, how are you even fucking standing?"
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Being seen.
Being seen,
and
that level of
level. Yeah.
I was just like, it blew me away. No one else
had said.
And I said, I don't fucking know, but I am.
Yeah.
And realizing it was probably too soon for me to be at that group and all these things, but you do just try to, you know, do the things, even if you're in shock, but just, wow, being seen like that, it was just super powerful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, sometimes, Lisa, I think on the other side of this, you know, when you were talking about the wounded healer and all of that, that like, apart from being a success culture, we're also, what is it, an education culture. You know, you get that and you get then, you know, your masters and then, but it, and not, I mean, you know, that's great, you know, but there's this other thing too, like, which reminds of initiation or something like that, that it is actually going through this kind of death rebirth that is the real qualification, maybe, because
Yes.
and sometimes I think one of the real great things of an experience like this is our common humanity. You know, the communitas, the it's
Yeah.
like, you know, whilst one loses all one supports in one way, this, like when she said that to you, that just the humanity of that statement.
Yeah.
And that
Right.
one is becoming, you know, we start to get touched by other people that have had these kinds of experiences.
Yes.
It's the qualification to help others in a way,
Yes.
as a therapist or healer.
I know. I was laughing with a friend of mine. We were saying there is nothing more confident than a 23-year-old life coach.
That is so true. That's when they used to say, you know, nothing worse than a young teacher. Never become a teacher when you're, you know, 21, 22
Right.
years. It's something.
Yeah.
True. But then we've all, you know, perhaps fallen into that at some stage or the other, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Lisa,
But
you know, I know we're getting close to the time, but where to? How do you see things from now? What have you been thinking about lately?
in terms of where,
well, I don't like to speak in terms of the future because that seems a bit old, you know, of, you know, constructing some future ideals or something like that. But
yeah,
where do you see what do you care about now, and what do you care about most is about the way you're living and how you'd
yeah,
like to live.
I care most now um about love. I care most about making choices that are soul based for me, going forward. Like it's like, I'm asking myself daily, what is my soul asking of me?
Yeah.
And what is love asking of me? And I just ask myself those simple questions a couple times a day, and see what shows up.
Yeah.
I'm not in that place of the drive, now, or maybe
You,
not
you won't
anymore.
you won't be running for politics there in Santa
I,
Fe
I,
or
I
anything like that?
won't.
No?
No. But, like I said earlier, I
Because
do
Trump is
feel,
after a vice president. For
oh,
his thing, I thought, no, you won't be doing that.
I'll watch from the sidelines. And I but I do, like I said earlier, I do feel that in some way my grief is now my path, and that I did go back and get my grief educator's certification, and I'm feeling into a few different ways that might look, but it's I've just moved, as you mentioned in the beginning. I needed a new chapter. I just moved from Boulder, Colorado to Santa Fe, New Mexico, just 3 months ago. So
Yeah.
I'm settling into my new place and this kind of holy land here, and which feels very grounding and very powerful. And I want to give myself enough space to
feel your way forward.
But many, like you mentioned before, many synchronicities have been happening, including the way I found my beautiful house here, and people who have been showing up, and it's been an overwhelming affirmation, you know, of a right direction. And that's enough for now.
Yeah. Well, that's lovely, Lisa. And I want to thank you for sharing so deeply at a you know, experience which is still so close in so many respects, and such a big experience to go through. So thank you very much.
And thank you for asking me.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye, John.